Hi everyone, welcome to our stream. Today we have a very special guest, but before I introduce him, I just want to say hello, welcome to our stream, and I also want to introduce Gridiron Survivor to anyone who doesn't know about what Gridiron Survivor is. So, what is Gridiron Survivor? It is a group that Shashi over there, he kind of formed it after he was reached out by Rudy, his friend, who's like, I kind of want to automate what I'm doing with my Football Survivor group, and would you be open to doing it? Joshua's like, absolutely, I would love to help you out, but you know, instead of just me doing it, I have all these people I know who I think would really benefit from working on a project together and the kind of pushing the project forward as the team management. Would you be okay with that? And he was like, absolutely. So Shashi was like, I'm just going to implement all my knowledge from my time at Microsoft and as well my many years as a developer and help these junior developers kind of bridge that gap between what we currently know and then what is usually the norm for working in a group of developers, like, retrospectives and doing one-on-ones and doing code reviews and doing PRs. So yeah, that's Gridiron Survivor. And the group has been coming along very nicely. We even had a couple people get jobs, and that's the goal. We want to eventually get everyone here a job and kind of just kick all of us off the team so we can add new people and then celebrate all the wonderful new jobs that we get. So that's Great Iron Survivor. And then I also want to thank our sponsors. Thank you so much for sponsoring Great Iron Survivor. Without our sponsors, none of this would be possible. So thank you and shout out to our sponsors. So now that we have all the introductions out of the way, I would love to introduce our very special guest today. His name is Nick Taylor. I had a very pleasant and wonderful time to get to talk to him in person at All Things Open. And he is Nick, would you love to introduce yourself and talk about
Yeah,
a little about what you do?
yeah, sure. Yeah, my name's Nick Taylor. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, so East Coast Canada representing. I'm senior software engineer. Depends where you are. I was at Netlify before and I was a staff engineer, but every company, there's different levels and it varies. But most recently, I know some folks might have seen it today. I'm actually starting to look for a job. But I was very recently leading front end over at Open Source, which is a platform. Best way to describe it is kind of like GitHub Insights plus plus. And I see Jason in the chat said, and he did his hair for y'all. It's not that I did my hair. I need a haircut very badly. I'm starting to look like the Lion King very badly. So
It's like the Lion King song starts playing in the background. Ah!
yeah, exactly. But so been mostly working in open source, pretty much like professionally. And when I mean professionally, being paid to work in open source since January 2020.
Awesome.
I worked at Dev2, Netlify, and open source more recently, and that kind of brings us to today.
It's
Sweet.
interesting you bring up Netlify because I actually do use Netlify pretty often. So like when you said you worked at Netlify, I'm like, oh my god, that's so cool because I also use
Thanks.
Netlify.
Yeah, it is an interesting role. I worked on the frameworks team, so my job was to basically make sure even though I had a lot of front end experience, this was more like it's good to understand frameworks, but this was really making sure that you could deploy like your Next.js app, your Astro app, Remix, etc. So a different type of role, but it was still super interesting and just got to work in different parts of the stack. So
That's awesome, Nick. You mentioned that you've been in open source a lot. For a lot of our viewers and especially the team, they are junior developers and some of them are just trying to break into tech. And oftentimes I hear that getting involved in open source is a good way to gain some experience or get your foot wet before you get your first job. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I definitely do. There's agree. Uh, there have been some hot takes. Like I know Theo the YouTuber, he
Yeah.
said like it's not a good idea. But But if you listen to what he's saying, it's more like it doesn't make sense if you're starting off and then you just say, I'm going to go contribute to the React repository. It's just like, it's too much a lift. Like, to be frank, I would be super intimidated to contribute to the React repository because
I would be too.
It's just like maybe back in 2016, contributing to React would have been more approachable, but now it's not that you can't do it. It's just, there's so much context around the project that the people who are working on it typically have that full context, which is either the core team or just some external contributors that have just been, contributing over time. But that said, I still think it's good to get into open source for many reasons, because one, we always talk about building in public. This is like, you're literally putting yourself out there. It also, like, I know typically most people I've spoken to, because I've spoken to a lot of career changes or people just starting off, and everybody wants a remote job, and I totally get it. I've been working remote. I wouldn't change that. But there's certain skills you need to have to be able to work in a remote context. And one of them is people always say communicating asynchronously. So that really means doing a lot of writing. So whether that's in issues or pull requests, but also like if you have a team Slack or something, especially when time zones come into play. Like I had a coworker that lived in Thailand when I worked at Dev2. If I just sent him a message saying it's not working, and he's sleeping, he's gonna wake up and he's gonna answer and say, well, what's the problem? So you kind of got to learn, and this gets better over time. You try and provide as much context as you can to the problem you're having, and it's super helpful. And this level of context varies depending on your experience level, obviously, but I think those are a few things that definitely make open source a really great path. But also, like, another thing is you're literally working with other people who might be professional developers already, and then they're going to know, like, oh, hey, Richard contributed to this project, and like, no guarantees obviously, but he might be like, hey man, Richard, you've been doing great work on this project. We've got a role open. I already know you. Like technically, it's probably been vetted already. So there's lots of amazing things like that that can happen too.
That's a great point, Nick. Something that I put in place for this particular project is a process.
Okay.
We run agile, we run sprints, we do stand-ups asynchronously because we can't meet every day, right? So I give them the feel of us doing Scrum asynchronously and then also in meetings, because I've done both, and it's different, right? Like it's a different feel and a different way to communicate to one another. And yes, I predicate communication is a big thing. And I want to ask you this about open source is, if somebody had no experience, right, and they're still just trying to get their feet wet, will open source give you the process and the things that you might be missing working on a team and trying to figure that thing, those things out, like and being seen so that they can get their first job?
Yeah. I think it's totally possible. I think it actually depends on the project, because not all projects are equal in terms of process. So like, like we had a really good process at Open Source, and I can talk a bit about it. Same thing at Dev2, but like sometimes you'll go to a project and it's just like, there's no documentation, which obviously they might welcome contributions for that. That's a side note, but that's one way to kind of get yourself started in a project. But others might not have processes in place. Like there might not be a pull request template. There might not even be an issue template. But I would say in general, most projects that have a bit of steam have these things in place now. So it is a good process. So like, for example, if what we forced on open source issues is you can't work on, well, you can work on it, but we're only gonna say you're actually working on it if you get tasked to the issue. And so I edited some automation for this. We had some GitHub actions, but basically anybody could actually say, they just type .take in the issue and then they can take it. But we have labels on the issues. So like if it says needs triage or blocked or core team, if you say .take, it's going to say, sorry, you can't take this. But
Mm-hmm.
if those labels aren't there, you can take it. And then there's that part. There's the please read the contributing guidelines. And like a lot of times when people are new, we have to say like, just a reminder, please read the contributing guidelines. And these are all the guardrails. And these are the things that happen in like real world projects, like actual jobs as well. So I think it can totally help. And definitely even processes like, I don't know how deep we'll get into automation today, but we have a lot of stuff in place. So it's like, oh, you didn't name your project. You didn't name your commit or the pull request name, fix fixed whatever, blah, blah, blah. Because we have this compliance action that runs to say like, because we, not to get too in the weeds, but there's something called conventional commits, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Sashi. But so if you don't even do that, which is mentioned in the contributing guidelines, your PR will fail to build right away.
Oh,
so
nice.
so we try to just kind of like force people in, not in a bad way, but just like, hey, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And the beauty of it is there's no human interaction at this point. It's just really like, nope, please do this. And it's a robot. So
yeah, it's great that you speak about automation. We try to do conventional commits, but we don't have a tool to block individuals from that. So maybe we should look into that because that'll be helpful. The reason why I say that is because we have ESLint and Prettier. And at first, when these individuals jumped on the project, they were like, "Oh, I'm just gonna code and do my own thing." And then, what are these errors? Why can I not compile? What is this going on, right? And I'm like, well, this is a way for me to code review your code without even touching it, right? It's automated so that you can find within our coding standards and our coding styles. And as you learn that, you'll become a better engineer because the code conforms to a standard. Like every project, every team is different. But if you have standards and whatnot, and you build these, then it allows you to understand how to write cleaner code. And it allows you to understand to conform to a team's standards. Without these, like if it's the Wild Wild West, like I always tell these individuals, when you're making your own project, you have no process, no standards. It's fine. It works. It looks great. It works. But then if you come into my world and like you have to conform to my standards, that it's not good enough, right? And that's gonna be the same when you go to other companies too. You only know as much as you know. But if you go into their world and say, hey, we have our certain way we do things, if you don't have even a process in place yet, it's going to be really hard for us to get you going. But if you already have some sort of organization and a process and you've been through it, you understand the loopholes of like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I can't do that. That's going to take you even further because every team is different. You've been in several teams. Every team is different.
Yeah, no, totally. And these are also things that you can speak to, like if you happen to interview. I'm working on Gridiron Survivor. We're using ESLint. We have this other thing that automates something. And these, like, it doesn't matter if you didn't build that automation. You can talk to that automation because this is things that like teams use all the time. Like I would say in the JavaScript ecosystem, Prettier is probably the de facto, at least for the time being. ESLint as well. So like, they're great tools to have. And there's other things too. Like, I know you do a lot of front end, Sashi. So like, you can even like for React, for example, you can even have ESLint rules that force you to not make accessibility violations. Like, oh, you didn't put alt text, or like this is a non-interactive element. You can't add a click to it. And to be clear, that doesn't cover the bases for accessibility, but again, it's just little guardrails that kind of try to set you up for success, so.
Very cool. It's great to hear about your background and the things you're doing. Now I want to turn the tables to our group, and if anybody has a question for Nick, please go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, so I'd love to start off by asking Nick. You talked about open source and talking about contributing guides and kind of like new developers joining into that open source community. And as someone who has worked at AppRight, which is also an open source project, I was curious to hear your opinions on what advice you would give to new developers who are interested in getting into contributing into open source projects, but it feels intimidating. It feels like, oh my God, this is such a big project. There's so many different files. Like the
Yeah.
workflow is so scary. Like I don't know if I should reach out to someone. I don't know how often I should ping for PR reviews. Like what kind of actionable steps would you advise new developers to take?
Yeah. The first thing is like, I think it's totally normal to be intimidated. Like I worked in the .NET ecosystem, so like C Sharp, ASP.NET stuff for like a long time. And then when I decided, like, I'd always been a fan of JavaScript, and when I wanted to get into open source, like Node.js, React, even TypeScript, back when I was like looking into all this stuff was open source, and so I was like, this is what I want to do. And up until that point, I hadn't used Git. Forget contributing to open source. Just getting the code or like making or pushing changes like that, I found super intimidating. So like, first thing is just get. I'm not saying you have to become like some kind of Git wizard, but I think learn a couple commands. Like how can I, clone the repository. And if you go to GitHub, you can literally copy paste the command to do that. But get familiar creating a branch and so on. Just some basic operations, committing the code. I know all of you do this now, but I'm just trying to think back when I was starting this, and it was intimidating. And the other thing I'll say too is it's 100% okay to use a user interface for Git if you want to. It's my mantra. Like, I'm typically in the terminal just because I've gotten used to it. I forced myself. That was just on me. But um, my goal really is like, just do whatever makes you the most productive. So if it's the GUI instead of the terminal, great. Whatever works for you. So that's kind of like a side note, but it does affect you contributing to open source. So, but after that, you know, don't like go into a repository and say like, okay, I'm gonna take the hardest issue and just try and fix it, because you'll probably, I mean, who knows, maybe you fix it, but I would say probably you're just gonna get a little lost and stuff too. So I'd say like, start off small. Most repositories like GitHub by default, I can't speak to GitLab, but GitHub by default has a good first issues label, and you'll usually find those. And start looking at that. The other thing too is, like I was mentioning, how we tell people to assign themselves to issues. So when you're looking in the issues, filter on the label called good issue, good first issue, but also look, filter on assigned to nobody. And then you can kind of just see a first pass, and then there'll be other labels, probably like this is documentation, or this is like front end or back end maybe. And then just kind of go through the list. And then like, if you see something that, that looks interesting, I just ask if you can be assigned to it. And 100% okay to ask questions, but definitely read through what the issue is. Make sure assuming there's like a setup environment in the docs and stuff, do all that. Just try and follow all the guidance they give you first before you start asking questions, because the main thing you have to remember is these people aren't your coworkers, for one thing, so you can't just ping them in Slack. So you kind of have to be mindful of people's time, especially because time zones too. And I've talked about this before in a talk I gave about open source, but like, you honestly don't know what's going on in people's lives. Like, maybe somebody's grandmother passed away. They're just super busy this week, so just kind of be mindful of that. But I would typically go with a good first issue and do the best you can on it. But if you're stuck on something, definitely ask questions. And you were mentioning this before, Richard, about asking about reviewing the PR. I typically would recommend not asking them like, hey, can you, because I see this a lot on our repo sometimes, like, can you please like they'll literally tag me. They'll say, hey, Nikki T online, this is done, can you review it please? And I don't get mad or anything, but it's more like, we get notifications about it, so like, I know it's there. It's just a question of when I get to it, because there's and the priority of it, because sometimes, even though we're an open source, I might be doing really important feature work and I can't address the external contributor stuff right away. So yeah, so I don't know if that I could go on and on, but like that, I'd say like that's a good first step. Just grab something that's bite size,
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing I'd say is like, once you accomplish that, if it was me, because like I don't like being mediocre. That's just me. Like I just always want to do better and better. So like
Mm-hmm.
be a little more ambitious the next time. Take something that's a little more out of your comfort zone, but still, like you might be like, I can't do this, but like get that in your head to just try something a little more ambitious. And I'm not saying this to sound cheesy, but you'll be very surprised with yourself over time. You're going to be like, holy moly, I did all that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just going from 0 to 60 and in the first issue you work on is not going to work, but gradually doing that, and you develop a rapport with the team. And again, that doesn't guarantee anything, but that's already connections that you make by just doing that.
I love how you mentioned the tagging aspect of the PRs, because I definitely found that happening when I was working at Outright and just like going through some open source projects. Like I would see people be like, "Hey, this person, can you please review my PR?" And like I always wondered, like from my side, I'm like, is I'm pretty sure they see the notification that you push to this PR and you're like ready for review and requested for review for this. So I'm not sure. I feel like it's a little redundant from my side. And I also love that you brought up the GUI, because we're actually sponsored by a GUI. It's called GitKraken, and I've been really enjoying using it. It's been very robust in terms of introducing different aspects of the Git commands that you normally see in CLI, but it kind of makes it more efficient to use, like creating a branch or just pushing a PR into the repository. So it's honestly great to use, and I never want to go back to just using the CLI commands anymore, because I'm like, it's just too efficient to use the GUI now. But I noticed that Jason had a question I'd love to hear your opinion on it. He asked, I'd love to hear about your experience from moving from different ecosystems and Netlify product to open source. And what is that like?
Yeah. So early on, like I think I've typically discovered that I enjoy working on product because you kind of get to see the full, like you get to see the long term, like how it progresses. But like at Netlify, it was a little different. The team I was on, the frameworks team, we weren't technically a product to the customers. We were just kind of like a cog in the machine for them to just say like, Richard wants to deploy his website. But internally, we tried to productize what we were doing just so we could have a roadmap and stuff. And we were somewhat successful. I think it progressed better because I haven't been there in about a year and a half. But so it was really more trying to productize something for internal, like the internal team, versus something like open source is a product that is really for people who work in open source. So like who are the customers, and it's so you have different audiences. So like my audiences for like at Netlify was definitely customers for sure, because they're like, my website doesn't work and there would be an issue open or something. But we were trying to, sell internally, like not sell, but like convince people like we need to do this. So like, and it was a little difficult productizing something internally, but like at somewhere else like Dev2, the product, it's like it was a blogging platform. Like the product was pretty clear, but we did have like there were certain things we had initially there that we eventually kind of pruned out, because one thing about open source is like if you can cause a bit of a monster if you just allow people to just commit whatever. You're like, this feature is going to be super cool. Let me put it in. And it's like, so but sorry, go ahead, Sasha.
Speaking of the different companies you've been to, every one of those that you spoke of, every single one requires onboarding, right? Onboarding as well as different team members, and you have to learn how to communicate with them. You speak on the importance of those two, of onboarding and just like adapting to the team.
Yeah, for sure. Onboarding is super important, and it's not something you should neglect. Like, don't join a team and just say, like, assuming you're an engineer, don't just go like, I'm going all in. I'm gonna go tackle that
Hmm.
issue right away. There's a reason why the onboarding's there, and depending on the like how long the companies have been around, the onboarding might honestly not be that great. Over time, they typically get better, but it really does vary because I've worked at larger companies like Autodesk and there was an onboarding as well. But I found the Netlify onboarding was really good and it's a smaller company. But the whole purpose of it, like I think a good onboarding is, well, the first thing is if you, once you go through the onboarding, take notes on anything that was missed in the onboarding. So like if you're doing your setup for your environment and then you ask somebody like, hey, this isn't working, and they're like, oh, it's because you didn't do this. Take note of that, because if you don't take note of it at that point, you're never going to put it in. And the next person's going to ask the same thing. So kind of leave the onboarding docs in a better state than when you looked at them initially. Um, the other thing is like, the thing I liked about the onboarding flow at Netlify was like, yes, there was the technical stuff, get familiar, like install this project, set up your account. Like there's a lot of administrative stuff too. Like
Hmm.
you'll get like your user account and stuff. You'll be added to the Slack or whatever you use. You'll get your G Suite account or whatever. So there's all those things, but there's also like one part I liked was like meet up with this team member, say hello, and just there was all these one-on-ones that you should have, and I thought that was a really great aspect. That was the first time I saw that in an onboarding, actually,
Hmm.
and I think it's really really good, and because you're going to end up on a certain team, but I think it's important still to just meet people on other teams, like maybe at like a Microsoft size, like where Sashi's at, it might not make sense for Sashi to say like, I'm gonna go talk to like, I don't know, the ML researchers
Yeah,
just to say
yeah.
hello because it's my first day. But like Netlify at the time I think was like a few hundred people, so it was manageable to just go say hey to another team and stuff. So but yeah, the other thing too, you just need to get some context of what you're going to be doing, and a lot of the onboarding can help with this. Um, but that said, even once you're done the onboarding, you're still going to have tons of questions, and you're still going to potentially feel like a fish out of water. I don't know
Hmm.
if people still use that expression, but like, and it's totally normal. But I highly recommend going through the onboarding for sure. Yeah, and
Awesome. Anybody else questions? Please hammer him with tons of questions.
Yeah, I actually have one because with you talking about like open source and stuff, that has definitely been something that I've been wanting to do, but I'm still kind of figuring out how to like search through GitHub and stuff to find open source projects. And
okay.
obviously, I don't want to join just like a random open source project because I don't know what that could like bring onto my computer or anything. So do you have like any
Yeah.
tips and tricks on like how you search for an open source project to like contribute to?
Yeah, it's honestly the way I've typically picked open source projects to contribute to are things I actually use. So, for example, like Dev 2, I started using that to blog back in 2017, I think, in the Christmas. And at some point, because it was Dev 2 used to be closed source, and at some point they said, hey, is anybody interested in contributing to the project? And so I'm like, I love this platform. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll contribute. And so that's how I kind of got into it. There was another project that I use all the time called Refine GitHub. It's a browser extension, so it's open source as well. And I liked it, so I basically started contributing to that and converted that to TypeScript because it originally wasn't, and they had an issue for it. But like in terms of like checking if it's like malicious or not, that's potentially a little hard to tell. But GitHub has an explore page. If you go to github.com/explore, I'm pretty sure that's the URL. Also, like shameless plug to like open source, but we had like an explore section too. Um, but I've typically gravitated towards projects that I use. So like I don't know if anybody uses daily.dev, but I'm pretty sure they have a bunch of open source stuff too. So like if you're like, hey, I love daily.dev, maybe go contribute to that. Or like Richard did, like I'm not sure if he was just super interested in AppWrite initially, and then he just decided like, hey, maybe I can contribute to it. But that's typically how I've found projects. And I know it probably doesn't answer your general, like, just let me go to GitHub and give me a good project. But you can, if you go to like those explore pages, you can filter on languages. So like if you're like, I want to work on React projects, you can go ahead and filter on React, and you should have some projects show up. The other way is like on socials, people are always posting projects and stuff. So like that's another way to find projects, for example. That's typically what I've done. But like I said, I don't typically go right to GitHub to look for something, but they do have that github.com/explore page. And like I said, there's the open source has a search page too, if you're interested. I'm curious how others, if anybody else has worked on open source, how you've found projects. Not to put anybody in the hot seat, but I'm just curious.
Well, for me, I found pieces through that conference in Wisconsin. I met like the good portion of the team, like Ellie and Rosie and
Okay.
Lauren and Mason, and I was really interested in their product, and I'm like, oh, this seems really cool. Let me check out the product first, and then I noticed like a lot of things about the documentation. I'm like,
Yeah.
I wonder if their documentation is open source, and it was. I'm like, ooh, I kind of want to contribute. So that's kind of how I found them. As for AppWrite, to answer your previous question, I think I found it through one of their knit events. I think they were
Okay.
like promoting it on Twitter. I'm like, what is it in it? I had no idea. Let me try and
Okay.
check it out. And then I saw in like one of the chats, one of the documentation engineers at the time, Vincent. I'm like,
Okay.
I want to reach out to him. And one thing led to another. I eventually landed an internship, and I kind of started just contributing. Well, not contributing, I guess, but more just working on the project. But that's technically contributing, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah.
I think, Nick, you brought a good point too early on, is like contributing to open source, because then that company or those individuals will learn you and get to know you without even like risking paying you to be an employee, right? Open source, because like if you do like with AppWrite or Pieces or even open source, once you start contributing and they start seeing your name, they start seeing your contributions, they're gonna be like, oh, who is this person? Like they're doing such a great job, yada yada yada. And they find out that you're unemployed, and then like, oh, hey, let's see what else they can do. Right.
Yeah.
It gives you a way to gain experience, but them a free way to find good talent. And finding good talent is the hardest thing, right? I mean, it's so hard to find individuals that work hard, do a good job, understand the product and all of that. Once you conform to their standards and you do that, like I've heard some people too contribute to open source or a company, and they're like, hey, would you like to come work for us? Because we have an opening and you've been doing such a great job that why don't we just hire you on? Right.
Yeah, totally.
That's like the best case scenario. But again, I believe that, if you do something, if you work on something that you actually like doing, or you're working on, or you've implemented in your own projects, you have more passion for it. And when you have passion into it, then you're going to push yourself harder and learn more. It's going to benefit both ends at that point.
Yeah, 100. And I'm not saying this to say you're guaranteed to get a job in through open source, but like I got approached by one of the founders at Dev2 to say like, hey, you've been contributing to the project for a while.
There you go.
And like that's how like my interview was like, do you want to work here? And then there was the like, yes, meet the team to see if it's a fit. But like I had honestly been contributing for almost 2 years, like building out their front end. So like they're like, yeah, we're not gonna give you a technical interview.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, and and for those individuals out there that are like looking for the next thing, open source is always a good fit if you find something that works well. Even companies that are open source right now, there's so many things. Like I'm sure if you go to AppWrite's issue logs, you can find something or 10 things that you can do. because it's open source. There's so like every product has so many issues, small, large, medium,
Yeah.
and you can contribute to it. And the more that you do it, it's kind of like working at a company. That's the same thing you're gonna do, right, Nick? Is getting tickets,
Yeah.
working on them, committing them, getting them reviewed, getting them merged through, doing it the whole thing all over again.
Yeah.
And that process itself, when you're working on your own projects, you don't do that because you're like,
Yeah.
oh, just commit it, push it up, it's good, like it looks great, and there's no issues,
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna track in my issues. But this slow process is what companies do, and the whole process of taking tickets and moving it through the queues and all that stuff, that is something that individuals working on them within their own projects, they don't receive that. So working on teams or open source projects or projects like Gridiron Survivor gives you that experience, so that hopefully it can set yourself apart from the other candidates.
Yeah. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning about like being able to work asynchronously, like in open source, but there's another aspect to that communication. Like if you're acting like a terrible human being, it's going to show up. And, you know, it's like working in open source. Like I've seen things where people are like, this sucks, fix my issue, it doesn't work, whatever. Like I 100% would never want to work with that person. Like, and so like, I say this because like sometimes, I mean, one, I just think you should be a good person in general, but like, it's kind of amazing sometimes that some people like think they have this kind of like virtual armor on because they're typing at a keyboard in front of a screen. And it's like, I don't know, like some of the stuff people write online sometimes, I'm like, really? Like, you know, and I'm just saying that because like that will come across as well, you know, and like, and I know you talk about feedback in Gridiron Survivor too. That's it's a tough nut to crack because you want to give constructive criticism, but you don't want it to come across as like, hey, Sashi, this sucks. It's more like this isn't working. Here's what we can improve. Like, and it takes time to get good at that. And I think we all still always work on it. But I think pulling the person out of the review is the best way to do this. So like instead of saying like, for example, Richard, this crashes when you use this code, don't do that. You could just say like, I don't know, calling this function causes a crash. And I use something called conventional comments. I don't do it like religiously, but so I'll write something like refactor blocking this function doesn't check for something, and then all I'm talking about at that point is the code, and it's still the same thing as like, Richard, your thing's crashing, but the way it's conveyed is 100% completely different, and it's just something that like, don't stress about it, folks here. Like it takes time to get better at this, and I'm not perfect at it either. Like, you know, sometimes you're just looking at something like, man, this is this is terrible. Like, but you have to kind of give that feedback in a good way, because I've definitely worked with people that will say something like, hey, this is shit, fix that. Like and I'm a little more thick-skinned because I'm a little older. These things don't bother me, but it's still not a great way to conduct yourself. So,
And talking about constructive criticism, what kind of advice would you give to developers that are receiving criticism? Like, how would you advise on approaching, like, okay, I received this criticism, how should I like approach what they gave me in terms of the feedback, and what actions should I take?
Yeah, I guess the first thing, I mean, unless they're just being terrible in the feedback, assuming they aren't being terrible in the feedback, I would accept that as like, this is your teammate. They want you to do better. Like Sashi is your lead, and he's not telling you these things to just say like you suck. That's not why. He's doing this because he wants you to get better. And so I would take that criticism as something like, what can I learn from this? What can I improve? And definitely ask questions like, Sashi, why did you decide that this works better than that? Like, I generally don't know. Like, and this gets back to asking questions, and there's a balance there too. Like, you don't want to constantly be asking like tons of questions. Again, read what's there, try and soak it in, try to best internalize what they mean. If something's super not clear though, like don't hesitate to get clarification. It's better to do that than like wait 2 weeks and like it's the end of the sprint and you're like, Sashi, I didn't finish it because I didn't know what to do. It's better to sound the alarm before, like, right away. Even if you're like, okay, Richard, you got this big task to do, and then you're 3 days in of like maybe a 2-week sprint. You're like, Sashi, I don't think we'll be able to finish this sprint, or like, can we scope it down? Like, what can we ship that might, like, and when I mean scope it down, I don't mean ship it like partially working, like ship some part of it that will work to give value to the customer or the client. If that's not possible, then maybe reassess like how many sprints it takes. But like, planning, this ties into planning, which I know you mentioned before, Sashi, like, your sprint planning and the stand-ups. So like, hopefully you can scope it out well, but sometimes there's things that just come out of left field, like, oh, I didn't know there was this legacy component that we have to completely refactor to do this actual issue, and it's just, we just missed it, but just bring those things up. It's not like somebody's going to scold you, or if they are, that it's probably somebody I don't want to work with. But just and this is the general theme here, is just communicate.
So you mentioned asking questions. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because it's something I'm definitely still working on. Asking clarifying questions is what is the best way to ask a really good clarifying question to someone to give the most context while not being too wordy, but also summarizing it in the best concise way.
Yeah. Honestly, if you wanted to make it more concise, sometimes I just throw stuff into like Claude or ChatGPT to just say like not to do a copy pasta of what it gave me, but it's like, I wrote too much. Can you drill it down to a little more concise? But at the same time, I wouldn't worry about that too much unless you're about to start writing some large novel that is your question.
Yeah.
It's like, I think the thing too is, I mentioned this before, but how much context you can give varies on your experience level. So if you're literally just starting out, the context that you could provide to Sashi might be, I went to the shopping cart page, I get a crash, and this is the error I see in the console. And like, that might be good enough for like, you're literally just starting out. If it was somebody more senior like myself and I was talking to Sashi or like giving him context, that wouldn't be enough from me. I'd have to be like, well, Sashi, like, I checked the network panel. It looks like the API is getting throttled. I'm not sure why. Or like, I also checked these logs. I've also debugged through it. Like, I'm able to give more context, but that really comes through the experience as well. But I wouldn't overthink it. Basically, just give as much context as you think you can, and I think that's good enough.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that, Nick. Danielle, I think you had a question.
Hey, Nick, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. How you doing?
Feel like it's been a mile a minute with Q&A. Feel free to breathe air and drink water if you need to do that.
Yeah, okay. I'll take a sip.
So I'm a career changer. I think this will be career number 4 or 5. I lose track. But I'm really interested in long-term success with software engineering. And I think a lot of juniors or people in my position are so hyper-focused on just getting in. Like, how do I get that first job? I'm curious if you have any thoughts or advice on, foundations are important. What are habits or skills I can start now to make sure that I have long-term success in this field?
Yeah, no, great question. I know people have opinions about like, you need to learn fundamentals first, or you need to learn a framework first, but I think they're both super important, but I think it's more important to just build something. And the reason why I say that is, like, say you only know React right now, like you see this map thing in React when you're creating a list of something, you're like, you just know that works. But you were able to like ship something and you can talk about that. And then at some point you're going to run into an error and you're going to be like, okay, this map thing, it says it's something's undefined. And then that's when you got to start digging into the JavaScript, the actual JavaScript, not just React code. And so I think it's good to have fundamentals, but don't think like I need to learn all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before I do anything. Again, I just have to stress they are super important, especially if you're doing front end, but just do the building part. And I think over time, you're going to learn the pieces of the framework that you're working with over time. And you're also going to learn like, oh, I learned this new thing in JavaScript now. There's this like, this question mark, and I can use that if I'm not sure if it's defined or not, and then it won't crash, and I don't have to do like if it exists or something, so yeah, the TLDR is really just build stuff, but the long-term success, I think, is, and I don't think a lot of people like to hear this, but you have to put in the work. And I know everybody's situation is different. I totally get it. But I know the people I know that have like been successful, like one of my friends from Virtual Coffee, Lucia Cerci, she's on her second role. She did a 6-week boot camp, and she just kept grinding and putting in the time. And I know, like, I'm all for work-life balance, but I'd be hypocritical if I said I was doing work-life balance my entire career. I did what probably a lot of junior people did too. Initially, I was up late reading stuff all the time. And but I'm not saying you have to grind, like still sleep and stuff, but I think it's important that you put in the work, because I think something happened during pandemic / the ZERP era where boot camps were kind of like, okay, we guarantee you this $100,000 job or whatever. And I think that did work for some people initially, but then we're kind of coming back to reality a bit, so to speak. I don't think this is too spicy, honestly, but don't expect, just because you did the course, don't expect to get a job. You still have to, you have to put in that work, and that work can be many things. It could be networking, also, doing some open source or coding in your, like, even if it's like 30 minutes a day, like, I don't play video games really, but like if I wake up in the morning and you're like having a coffee or whatever, or you've got like 30 minutes, just spend that time, and like it'll compound over time, especially if you're transitioning from a career. So you might be doing other stuff. You might even have another job right now. So like, you just have to put in the work. And a lot of people don't like to hear that sometimes.
No, I actually really appreciate you saying that, because I'm on a 6-month sabbatical to be immersed, right? Like to really put in that work. And a lot of people said that was crazy, but like, I'm glad that that's a worthwhile thing, right? To invest that time. So thank you. That was a really detailed answer.
Yeah, I would concur with Nick too. Like I've said this to the group too, do you believe that you need to be consistent and like continue to code every day to get good? And I think most majority said yes. And someone said until you burn out. And I said, yeah, that's true. But the honest reality is, like Nick's spicy take is, you have to grind it. You have to grind it. When you're a beginner, you only know so much. And until you know a lot more, you have more experience in a lot of other things, you have to grind to catch up. You have to figure it out. And even when you get on the job too, it's not cut and dry. Like there's so many things that you have to do extra just to catch up. There's so many things that so many weekends that you just like, I need to do this because I don't want to fall behind. Or I'm onboarding and I don't understand this at all, and I'm going to do extra time just to get, a leg up. It's so much extra things. Like when I was coming up, I did full time and then I did freelance too. So I double dipped, and not saying I'm the best engineer in the world, but it allowed me to push myself. It allowed me to understand more concepts and things like that. Because then, like you said, I kept building and building and building. And as I building, I explored functions. I explored tools and stuff that I needed to use, and that's where I really dipped my toes and got wet. So that's why, like, for these individuals, for this project, I tell them, give me the time you need. But if you don't
Yeah.
spend at least 10 hours a week, it's not worth it for you, and it's not for the team, because we've had individuals, other individuals that spent less time, and even though it was nice for them, it didn't benefit them and it didn't benefit the team. And so that's why, like, when you're working for a company, like, yeah, obviously it's 4 hours a week, but you're spending so much more time, and you have to spend extra time just to continue to advance your career and everything. So yeah, I think the grind sucks, but it's much needed. The more you, I would say this, the more you grind, the sooner your timeline is shortened to be not hireable, but to have the skills, to have a chance to get into the market. It's just, there's just so many people in the market, and you have to set yourself apart.
Yeah, 100. And the thing about standing out too is like I do think you do have to put in that time. But for example, like I was working at a company where I was doing .NET and we were using Angular, and this was like back in 2016 or late 2015. I was like, because React came out, just a little history lesson. React came out in 2013. TypeScript came out in 2012, and I was like super interested in React, but I was never going to do React at work. And that's how I found before we had frameworks, there used to be things called boilerplate projects. So I started contributing to a React boilerplate project so I could learn React. And I also took Dan Abramov's free Egghead course on Redux, which Redux isn't React, but it's something that was commonly used at the time, and it's still used. But like that was me putting in time outside of work, because I was never going to use these things at work. And I consciously did that because I got a role after that through some people I knew, but I all of a sudden was working on a TypeScript React project, and it's because I put in that bit of time. And and I don't regret it at all, because like that, my whole career path changed after that, once like I went into open source and focused more on those things. So but you were saying, Sashi, standing out. I think you totally have to. You're in a sea of like, there's how many here, 4 or 5 of you. If you're all like, I want to be a front end dev, there's like probably at least 20,000 other people that want to be a front end dev. They want to work remote, and so like do some things that maybe other people aren't doing at your skill level. Like boot camps never do testing or even like accessibility, or if they do, they skim it very lightly. Like I was a volunteer at the Collab Lab, and they did touch on accessibility, but there's a reason why these things don't get covered. It's because you're on such a fixed timeline. So like this goes again to putting in the work yourself, but like stand out a bit. If you have like some accessibility experience, somebody else doesn't. And I can tell you, like, for example, front end roles at Netlify, and I'm assuming at Microsoft too, like accessibility is a must.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't just say like I do TypeScript and you're gonna get a front end role. Like so find ways to stand out, and that could be just, not that you have to go niche on accessibility, but like maybe spend a bit of time on testing and learning about that, because that'll be something that probably most juniors don't have. I'm not saying you need to become an expert at it, but already you're going to be setting yourself apart from other people. So
that's great you bring that up. We definitely have a high focus and emphasis on testing, so that's something that we're doing. I wanted to see if Cody had a question for you, Nick. Cody, do you have anything for Nick?
Well, I had a question about open source. You might have touched on this a little bit, but I'm really interested in like particular niches in open source. Like my background's in healthcare. I'd really like to work on like some kind of digital health open source application. Do you recommend just like going on socials and just trying to find people in that space, or?
You could. One that stands out just because he's so prominent is, I guess he's technically your coworker, Sashi, but Scott Hanselman has diabetes, and I've heard him talk multiple times about he has a synthetic pancreas. There's an open source project related to this. I'm not saying he'll answer you. I feel like he probably would, but you could just say, hey, like, I'm interested in working on this project. Can you tell me more about it? Or try it before you even drop Scott a tweet or something, just maybe try and figure out what that project is. And I'm not saying you have to do that particular one, but it's the first one that popped in my head when you said that. I don't know of other healthcare ones, honestly, offhand. I think that's something I would throw a question out to socials or on LinkedIn, or maybe just try doing a bit of searching on that. But yeah, but side note, like the synthetic pancreas sounds, yeah, is it pancreas? Yeah. Anyways, it sounds like a cool project. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It could be interesting.
Plus, if you get in with Scott, he's got lots of connections.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I could message him on Teams, but he probably wouldn't even answer me.
Yeah, and he's been in the industry for a long time.
Oh, yeah, so long.
Yeah. But yeah.
So we have a question from Karina. She couldn't make it, but she wanted to ask, what qualities do you use? What qualities do you appreciate when someone new joins the team, especially a junior person?
Honestly, not sound cheesy, but ask questions. Like seniors have a lot of experience and knowledge, but we don't know everything. Like I'll be the first to admit that I don't know everything. Like, I'm never gonna know everything, and it'd be kind of foolish for me to think that. And it's super, I think it's a great thing to do because it challenges the other devs to actually explain something. Like, hey, Sashi, I'm new on the team. How does the design system work? Like, I heard about these tokens. What is that? Or like, can you just kind of, like, you read up a bit maybe, but like, like, I don't understand how that goes from this to all of a sudden I've got the color Microsoft blue in this button, and Sashi would be like, he'd probably have to reflect on it and go like, okay, well, it starts off here and then this, and and it forces the other devs to communicate and explain themselves. And there's been a lot of times when I've explained something to somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, wait, how does that part work?
Yep.
So I think honestly asking questions is probably the best thing you can do if you're starting off.
Awesome. I know we're almost at the hour mark, so wanted to give you the floor to see if you had any last remarks or any shout outs or any personal things you're doing.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I do live stream. So if you go to nickit.live, you can find all the places I stream. Also, it's very fresh, but yes, I even myself, I am looking for my next role. I've definitely got some stuff on the go, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm doing some contract work in the meantime, just so I, don't have to stress out about, rushing into a next role. So I want to find the best fit. But
so for your next role, what are you looking for? What's your pitch?
Yeah, I'd say full stack, but like basically at open source, I built out a lot of the front end and like some of the design system, and eventually we got another person, but initially it was literally just me building it. So I definitely have strengths there, but I also would like to do other things as well. It's nothing against front end. I think it's great, but I did a lot of the stuff for our AI offering at open source. So I built out like the whole chat interfaces. I also worked on a bit of an AI agent, and I also recently hung out with some people from GitHub, and I built out a Copilot extension. So like I'm kind of interested in like the intersection of AI and UI as well. But also like I've been writing, like we were writing Go code, like it's yeah. So I mean, definitely front end stuff, but I'm also leaning towards like full stack and like probably a lead role or a senior. Like at Netlify, I enjoyed being an IC, like at staff level, and it's because you're not necessarily the leader, but you still have a stake at the table, and working with other teams and stuff. I find that really great. But the one thing I'd say is like right now, at least, I don't want to be a manager.
Me too.
I'm still enjoying being an IC. Yeah.
I thought I did, but after I saw my manager, I was like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah.
Hey Nick, we do have one last question. Michael, I want to give everybody a chance to ask a question. So Michael had a question for you.
Yeah, for
Will
sure.
being a content creator, such as a blogger, help when applying for your first tech role?
I think it can help, like anything where you build in public. That could be blogging, live streaming, open source. All these things are like you're leaving a footprint of yourself somewhere, and it's not that like a recruiter is going to read literally all your blog posts, but they'll probably see like if the thing with content creation is be consistent. So like and and honestly, not all your blog posts need to be amazing, but I think it's another piece out there of you that people can find. And I've definitely had opportunities where people say, "Oh, I read your blog post about how you configured ESLint and Prettier and automated it," and like, or like I wrote a thing on testing. So like people do find these things and they do show up. So I I definitely think it's a good thing. And again, I don't think this is a spicy take, but the stakes are so much higher these days for getting that initial role, and even anybody that already has a role, that it's almost like you're not just a dev, you're also a content creator and your own manager, you know? So like I think anything, this gets back to the whole standing out, and blogging can definitely be one of those things. I can 100% say like the live streaming I do, and I don't have a huge like following. Like I'm still under 1,000 people on Twitch and like YouTube, but I've met so many people in the industry that way, and like that's my CEO from GitHub. Sorry, from Open Source. I had him on the live stream when I was at Dev 2, then on my own stream, and he remembered me from that, and he knew I was doing open source, and that again, that was that bit of breadcrumbs that brought me to open source. So I definitely think it's a good path to be on. So definitely blogging, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. As a fellow content creator and trying to kind of delve into streaming, I've recently discovered it's been interesting to kind of explore the different aspects of content creation, like creating blogs and streaming. And I'm sure it's been very fruitful for me, and I hope it's been fruitful for you as well, Nick. Just exploring the different aspects of being a content creator, putting yourself out there, and kind of showing the world what you're capable of, as well as just kind of touching on different things that you might not be familiar with. So it was great to chat with you, Nick. It was love. Thank you so much for joining us and being here with us and answering all of our wonderful questions and giving us so many wonderful advice and tips from your journey. It was great hearing you talk, and I hope to see you again at another
Yeah.
conference, Nick. I know. Are you? You're not going to commit your code, right, for Danny?
No, I unfortunately can't make that one. The next conference I'm at is a local one in Montreal called Confu, but I've submitted some others. Like I'm hoping to get a talk accepted at React Miami and Render ATL. We'll see. We'll see.
I am going to render ATL, so I
Me
will
too.
see you there.
All right. Okay. So I'm gonna have to make sure I get my butt over there to finally meet Sashi. I've already met you, Richard, but I'll see you again for sure. Awesome.
All right. We're gonna thank you everyone for joining our stream. Nick, if you could just stay after we close out the stream, we'd appreciate it. And thank you
Yep.
everyone again for joining our stream. I hope you had a wonderful time watching us. I hope you had got a lot of great advice listening to Nick and all of us just talk. And thank you again. And we hope to see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.